morning, students. My name is Saya Madhvi. I am working as Assistant Professor in School of Business and Management, Jaipur National University, Jaipur. Today, I am going to teach you the subject Environmental and Disaster Management. In this session, we are going to learn about the concept of ecosystem and the different types of ecosystems. So, before going to ecosystem, let us learn about what is ecology. Ecology is the study of the different types of ecosystem. The word ecology is derived from a Greek word oikos, which means house or place to live. It is a study of organisms in various habitats. Ecology is the study of nature's structure and its function. This is a study of interrelationship between the individual organisms. Population. Population means organisms which belongs to the same species, and community, that means the number of populations that are included, and this is all about the ecology. Now, definitions. Ecology is the study of interactions among organisms or group of organisms with their environment. So here the environment consists of both biotic components, that means living organisms such as animals and human beings, and abiotic components such as non-living organisms. Now let us see the definition of the ecosystem. So the components of the environment such as living and non-living organisms interact and function together as a unit is called as ecosystem. Now the parts of the ecosystem are interdependent. So if there is any damage or imbalance of the ecosystem, then what happens is there will be a problem in the process of the life. The living components includes plants and animals, whereas non-living components includes water, land and soil. Now here we can see that the living components, they are influenced by the non-living components. The forest, desert, then pond ecosystem, all these are different types of ecosystem, and they are interdependent upon the non-living organisms. The living environment is also called as biotic environment, and non-living environment is called as abiotic environment. So the living organisms, it includes the structure of living organisms. It includes three types, that is producers, consumers and decomposers. Then there are different types of ecosystems. Ecosystems are of two types, terrestrial and aquatic. Terrestrial are land-based ecosystems and aquatic are water-based ecosystems. The terrestrial are again of three types, that is forest ecosystem, grassland ecosystem and desert ecosystem. Whereas aquatic ecosystems, they are again of two types, that is marine ecosystem and freshwater ecosystem. The example of forest ecosystem is plants, trees, shrubs, herbs, and the examples of the grassland is grass and herbs. Temperate grasslands and savanna grasslands are the examples of the grasslands. When we come to desert, we can see the most of the planet is occupied by this desert. There is a scanty rainfall in these deserts. The days are hot and the nights are very cold in the desert. Then when we come to this aquatic or water ecosystem, we can see that it is a marine ecosystem. The examples are seas and ocean. And when we come to freshwater ecosystem, it is again of two types, that is running water ecosystem and standing water ecosystem. When we come to running water ecosystem, the examples are rivers and streams. Whereas when we come to standing water ecosystem, the examples are ponds and lakes. The structure or components of an ecosystem. The term structure refers to the various components. So the structure of an ecosystem explains the relationship between the abiotic and the biotic components. So the components are of two types, that is biotic and abiotic. The biotic components includes producers, consumers and decomposers. Whereas abiotic components, they include physical components and chemical components. Now one by one we will learn what is meant by these producers, consumers and decomposers. First, when we come to the category 1, that is producers. The examples of the producers are plants and animals. So these plants, they produce the food with the help of a green pigment called as chlorophyll present in the leaves of the plants. This system is called as photosynthesis. The process of photosynthesis includes utilization of the sunlight from the sun, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water and minerals, and they produce the food. So sunlight is the only source of energy which is available on the earth. Then when we come to consumers, the examples of the consumers are plants and animals. There are 3 types of consumers. The first one is herbivores or primary consumers. For example, you can see goat, sheep and cow. These feed on the parts of the plant and also they eat the plants. So they are called as herbivores or primary consumers. When we come to secondary consumers or carnivores, these feed upon the herbivores and they are called as secondary consumers. And when we come to the third category, they are called as tertiary consumers, which feed on both herbivores and the secondary consumers. Now, when we that is about the consumers. Then comes the decomposers. Examples are bacteria and fungi. These decomposers, they feed on the dead organic matter. They disintegrate the dead complex organic matter into simple organic matter which synthesize in the soil. The absorbed materials or minerals are again absorbed by the plants to produce the food. Now that is about the biotic components. Now let us see about the abiotic components, which are non-living organisms. So here this abiotic components includes 2 types, that is physical and chemical. Physical components, they include the climate, raw materials and living space that the biological community needs. They are useful for the growth and maintenance of its members. For example, air, water and soil, etc. Then when we come to the second category, that is chemical components. They are the sources of essential nutrients. For example, organic substances, proteins, lipids and carbohydrates are the examples. When we come to the inorganic substances, it includes again 2 types, that is micronutrients and macronutrients. So all micronutrients, they are essential in a little quantity. They are available in little quantity, and for example, aluminium, cobalt, zinc, copper, etc. And macro elements are required in large amount for the living organisms, and they include examples is carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, nitrogen and potassium. So that is about the abiotic components. Now let us see about the functions of an ecosystem. So to understand clearly the nature of ecosystem and its functioning, it should be thoroughly understood. So the function of an ecosystem is to allow flow of energy and cycling of nutrients. So the functioning of an ecosystem may be understood by studying the following terms: energy and material flow, food chains, food webs and food pyramids. So first one, when we take energy flow in the ecosystems. As we know, energy is the most important requirement or essential requirement for all living organisms. So solar energy is the only source to our planet Earth. Even though the plants are exposed for a longer time under the sunlight, still only 1% of the sunlight is utilized for photosynthesis. So solar energy through photosynthesis is transferred to chemical energy, which is utilized by the plants for their growth, and remaining is transferred to the consumers by the process of eating. So only half of the energy that is taken by the plants is utilized for producing the food, and remaining is given to the consumers. Now this energy flow is related to the laws of thermodynamics. So 2 of the laws of thermodynamics are related to the energy flow. What are they? The first law of thermodynamics says that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So here energy is not created, but we are getting energy from the sun in the form of sunlight. And at the same time, you can see that the energy is also not destroyed. It is transferred from one form into another form. Then when we come to the second law of thermodynamics. So whenever energy is transformed, there is a loss of energy through the release of heat. So we can say that when energy is transformed from one trophic level to another trophic level, the potential energy is lost in the form of heat, and it is about 80 to 90% of the energy. So in the diagram you can see the sun, that is the source of energy, is the producers are taking the sunlight from the sun to produce a food for this photosynthesis. Then we can see that the consumers are feeding on the producers, where some here energy is lost. That means here energy, there are two reasons. The first one is energy is produced for the biomass, and the second one is energy is lost when their activities are being held. Then the third one is decomposers. When the fungi, bacteria, when they are feeding on this dead organic matter, there also some energy is lost in the form of heat. And finally, it is produced into inorganic nutrient pool, which is again consumed by the producers. So students, you can see that there is an energy flow in the form, and it is neither being lost and it is not being created nor destroyed, but it is only losing energy in the form of heat from every step to another trophic level. When you study about this energy flow, we also have to study about the ecological succession. So in an area, one community may be replaced by another community or by a series of communities. Thus, the progressive replacement of one community by another till the development of stable community in a particular area is called as ecological succession. So you can see in the diagram the process of succession on a bare rock. So in the diagram you can see, in the first diagram you can see a rock is there. So the stone was lying for many years. After many years, when it is exposed to sun, rain and all these things, the part of the rock is disintegrated, it breaks, and you can see some sand. So this sand, when rain falls in the sand, some eggs of this mosses or lichens fall and they grow on the surface of the rock. And the same way, annual grasses are growing in the third stage, and in the fourth stage you can see perennial grasses, and in the fifth stage you can see small shrubs are growing on the rock. And finally you can see the evolution of a new community, that is trees, forest. So you can see that there is a progression of one community to another community. You can see that barely it was a rock in the first stage, but later it developed into a new community, and this is called as ecological succession. Now when we speak about ecological succession, there are again two types of ecological successions. One is primary succession. So it involves the gradual establishment of biotic communities on a lifeless ground. For example, again you have two types of primary succession. One is hydrox or hydroseed. So establishment starts in ponds or lakes in such type of succession. Then there is another type of primary succession, that is xerarch and xerosphere. So here establishment starts in a dry area like desert and rock, as we showed in the example in the slide. Now there is another type of succession that is also called as secondary succession. So it involves the establishment of biotic communities in the area where some type of biotic community is already present. So this ecological succession, it consists of two types of succession, primary succession and secondary succession. So primary succession is where the establishment of biotic communities in a dry area, whereas secondary succession, it involves the establishment of biotic communities already where some type of biotic community is already present. Next one is food chains. This is a very important part of ecosystem. So transfer of food energy from the plants through a series of organisms is known as food chain. So when the organisms die, they are all decomposed by microorganisms such as bacteria and fungi into nutrients that can be again utilized by the plants. So at each and every step, already we have discussed that nearly 80 to 90% of the potential energy gets lost as heat. A food chain always starts with a plant and ends with an animal. The various steps through which food energy passes in an ecosystem is called as trophic levels. The trophic levels, they are arranged in the following ways, such as T1 is the first trophic level where it includes producers, examples are green plants. T2 is the second trophic level where it includes herbivores or primary consumers. T3 is the third trophic level which includes carnivores or secondary consumers. Then we have fourth trophic level, that is T4, which includes the tertiary consumers, and finally we have T5, that is decomposers. So these are the various trophic levels where energy flows from one trophic level to another trophic level. Now, food chains are classified into two main types, that is grazing food chain and detritus food chain. Now let us see the example of the food chain. You can see here the example of the food chain, the diagram I have shown in this slide. In the second diagram, you can see this is a simple type of food chain where you can see grass is the producer and grasshopper eats the grass, and this is a primary consumer. Mouse eats the grasshopper, this is a secondary consumer, and we can see that the owl eats the mouse and that is the tertiary consumer. So this is a simple type of food chain. Now when we see the top diagram, you can see that grass is the producer which produces the food. The primary consumer is a grasshopper which feeds on the grass. And we can see that the bluebird is the secondary consumer which feeds on the grasshopper, that is primary consumer. And you can see that the tertiary consumer, snake, eats the bluebird, and finally another type of predator, that is owl, also feeds on the tertiary consumer. And we can see that the dead organic, when these birds and snakes and all this die, they form into dead organic matter which is decomposed by the decomposers such as bacteria and fungi. And they break down this complex organic substances into simpler organic substances which are absorbed by the soil. And finally, you can see that these minerals, they are again absorbed or utilized by the producers where they are used for the production of the food. So you can see, students, that this is a cycle of the food chains where energy is flowing from one trophic level to another trophic level. Now comes the different types of food chains. As I told you previously that there are two types, that is grazing food chain and detritus food chain. So grazing food chain always, it starts with plants and ends with animals and finally decomposers. In this, you can see that the primary producers are the plants. The caterpillar is the primary consumer which feeds on the plants or the leaves of the plant, and the secondary consumer is the frog which feeds on the caterpillars. Snake is the tertiary consumer which feeds on the frog, and finally you can see the final consumer, that is the owl. And finally they are decomposed by the dead organic matter. And when we come to the second type of food chain, that is detritus food chain, which starts with dead organic matter which are fed by bacteria and millipedes. With the help of oxygen, they convert this dead organic matter into inorganic nutrients which are finally again consumed by the producer, the plants, for again preparation of the food. So we can see that these food chains are all linked together and they form an important ecosystem. Now when we come to the food web, this is a third type of the functioning of the ecosystem. So here, the interlocking pattern of the various food chains in an ecosystem is known as food web. So in a food web, many food chains are interconnected where different types of organisms are connected at different trophic levels. Each level depends upon the one below it for food and energy supply. So you can see here the diagram, that is the diagram of the food web, where you can see the various types of food chains are interconnected together to form the food web. So you can see here almost 3 to 4 food chains are interconnected. So you can see the producers, that is grass, is eaten by the mouse, and finally it is eaten by the hawk, which forms one type of food chain. You can see that the grass is eaten by the rabbit, which is again eaten by the hawk. This forms the second type of food chain. You can see that the grass is eaten by grasshopper and it is again eaten by the hawk, that forms a third food chain. And fourth one is grass is eaten by the grasshopper and it is eaten by secondary consumer, that is frog, and finally the tertiary consumer, hawk. So you can see this is all the interconnection of the various food chains, and this forms into a web called as food web. Now you should know the difference between what is a food chain and what is a food web. In the food chain, when any of the trophic level becomes disintegrated or extinct, then the whole ecosystem becomes imbalanced. Now, when you can see, and when we can compare with this food web, we can see that when any one of the food chain becomes extinct, or when any part of the food chain becomes extinct, there is no influence on this food web, because there are other types of food chains which are continuing the ecosystem. Thus, we can say that food web is much better than that of the food chain. Now, we come to the last part, that is ecological pyramids. So, ecological pyramids or food pyramids are graphical representation of the trophic structure of the ecosystem. Now, these trophic levels are the feeding positions in a food chain, such as primary producers, herbivores or primary consumers, carnivores or secondary consumers, and finally we have tertiary consumers. Now there are 3 types of ecological pyramids or food pyramids. The first one is pyramid of numbers. So here pyramid of numbers tells you that it represents the number of organisms at each stage of a food chain. So this is a upright pyramid for terrestrial ecosystem. So you can see that the number of producers are more in number when compared to the number of consumers which are at the top. So the producer occupies the base of the pyramid, and the consumers, the tertiary consumers, occupy the apex of the pyramid. So you can see in the diagram that as the organisms or as the trophic level increases from producers to the consumers, the number of organisms decrease from base to the top. So that is about the pyramid of numbers, and it will tell you how many organisms are present in each trophic level. Now there is one more second type of ecological pyramids, and that is called as pyramid of biomass. So it represents the total amount of biomass present in each trophic levels. So in this slide, you can see there are 2 types of pyramids. One is upright pyramid of biomass in a terrestrial ecosystem, and another one is inverted pyramid in an aquatic ecosystem. So when you can see the upright pyramid of biomass in a terrestrial ecosystem, you can see that each trophic level, it represents the total mass of biomass present in each trophic levels. Here also we can see in this upright pyramid, you can see that the producers occupy the base of the pyramid, whereas top carnivores occupies the apex of the pyramid. The biomass of the producers is more when compared to the biomass of the top carnivore. That shows that there is a decrease in biomass as we go up to the top of the pyramid. So, but it is not the same when we come to aquatic environment. We can see that in aquatic ecosystem there is inverted pyramid, which is quite opposite. We can see that the biomass of producers is less when compared to the biomass of the carnivores. So you can see that there is an increase in biomass in inverted pyramid of aquatic ecosystem. Then the third type of ecological pyramid is pyramid of energy. So it is a graphical representation of the flow of energy through each trophic levels of a food chain over a fixed time period. So here also we can see that the producers are occupying the base of the pyramid, whereas the tertiary consumers are occupying the apex of the pyramid. And you can see that slowly the energy flow is decreasing from base to top. So you can see that the producers are consuming 100% of energy. The giraffes which are eating or which are feeding on the trees, they consume only 10% of energy, whereas the secondary consumers, the lions, utilize only 1% of energy, and finally you can see that the wild dogs, the tertiary consumers, they utilize only 0.1% of the energy. So you can see that there is a decrease in the energy flow from the base to the top. Now, in the second, one more example we can see in pyramid of energy. This is also one example of this energy. Here we can see that the producers are the green grass, which are eaten by the grasshoppers, which consume only 100 kilocalories. The mice which eat the grasshopper, they also consume only 10 kilocalories. And finally, you can see the hawk which eats the mice and it utilizes only 1 kilocalories. So here we can say that the energy, the first reason is the energy is transformed into biomass, and the second reason is the energy is released or in the form of heat when you are doing the activities from one trophic level to another trophic level. So that is all about the ecological pyramids. So students, I hope you have understood this particular topic, ecosystem. Thank you.